Okay, we're back here looking at the FTM-200 and thinking about the difference between that and the 300. And I thought I'd talk about my thoughts. If you're considering one of these radios, I hope you'll join me for the rest of this video as I talk about some of the things I have seen that are different between them. I purchased mine from DX Engineering, so I'm looking at a comparison that I found on their site. Besides the numbering system and the price difference, you don't see immediate obvious differences. Yes, the styling is a little bit different, but they're very recognizable as being in the same family. Styling meaning the buttons are different between the two. As you go down the list of features, you will see both do aircraft band. They do not cover the AM band. They have a one antenna port. Both feature VHF, UHF, dual band. The 200 does not do crossband repeats. So there's our first functional difference. Both have a detachable faceplate. Dimensionally, the faceplate is pretty much the same here. Going down, they transmit at 50 watts. Minimum power is 5 watts. And then we're looking at the rest of the body of the radio. Almost identical. The 200 is very slightly taller, but not enough to notice without measuring. And you can see that the receive range is the same, even though it's listed in a kind of funny way. I personally own the 200, which you're seeing here on screen. I've been really enjoying this radio, but I know some commenters have wondered why I chose that one over the 300. And that's still a question that haunts me today, not because I feel bad about this choice, but there are some differences that make you think. So getting right down into things here, we'll just look at the physical characteristics of the radio. The 200, as you can see, has all black buttons. To me, they feel very nice. They have a nice solid feel to them. And instead of having two knobs on either side to control the volume and provide multi-functionality between the top and bottom, the A and B portions, on the 200 you have the VFO memory write button on the left and the band group on the right. And some of the functional buttons that are right next to the screen are slightly different. For example, the back button does not have its own separate button. It shares with squelch, which I find perfectly reasonable. So once we get past the physical characteristics of them, I think this is where the story gets a little bit more complicated. When you look at the lineup, you have 100 to 400. The 400 I know has been discontinued in the recent past. I do not know for sure what the status of the 100 is. I have not seen it around on the stores and didn't really spend a lot of time trying to look for it. But the naming scheme implies a sequential raising of the features from 100 to 400. But the thing that makes that story complicated is they were not released at one time. So you find differences between them that are not obvious right at the top. The 400 is the oldest. And when you look at this little clip I found, you'll notice that the band scope function just looks so much more agile on the new radios. It's kind of amazing. And it does cause you to think, whether you purchase one of the older radios, because it makes it look like functionality has just slowly improved over time. Yaesu talked about the 400 being discontinued because of a chip shortage. In my opinion, the pandemic really kind of threw everybody for a loop. And not just because there was chip shortages, but the demand for high-end chips made it difficult for fabricating companies to allocate space for older, cheaper designs when they could sell manufacturing time to a bigger, higher profit margin thing. So it makes sense to me that there could be a difficulty in sourcing older chips, not because they couldn't be cheaply made, but because that manufacturing capability went to something else. But I mean, is that really bad when the functionality of the newer radios has improved in a noticeable way? So the comparison can't strictly be between the features, but also in some of the ease of use, some of the functionality of the radio seems nimbler and higher performance. What we did not see in that comparative list from DX Engineering is some of the other functionality differences you're going to find between the 2 and 300. The 300 has a Bluetooth built in. The 200 does not. You can buy it separately and put it in. That has been designed for that addition, so there's no difficulty other than the cost. And as far as I know, the cost differences would bring the 200 up to the same cost as the 300 while missing the true dual band receive functionality that you find on the 300. So at this point, I have not bothered with the Bluetooth edition. I don't really know what I would do with it yet, but it remains an open question for me. I just sometimes wish I had the dual receive, but even that story is slightly complicated because on the 200, the PMG mode, which gives you a visual representation of memories that you have added to that feature, so you can quickly glance down and see if something's happening without the confusion of multiple audio sources coming at you at one time. So I don't think that it is necessarily a true loss, and I like the idea of having the newer radio for some of the reasons that we've already talked about. The second big thing that I wanted to discuss is the actual usability of the radios and some of the differences that I've seen by comparing videos that I found online and looking at the manual for the 300 and comparing it to my user experience with the 200. Again, I think that as time goes along, the general trend is in improving these user schemas, and so that did kind of weigh in favor of going with a newer, slightly lower model one. So to start with, when you push the menu button, you get into a quick screen here on the 200 that allows you to modify up to 10 different functions without going deeper into the menu. The 300 has something similar, but instead of 10, it brings up 4, one of which is only accessible if you add an additional board to it. So that would be an additional cost of the radio. I kind of like this 200 because this quick screen can be modified and it gives you access to quite a few things right off the top. For example, if you're going to set a CT/CSS tone to a repeater memory that you're programming, that's accessible with the quick push of the F menu here on the top, and you just rotate down to the various squelch and tone options and modify them right here. On the 300, you go to the quick menu, you go to function, and then you have access to that. So it's one level deeper to get to those particular features. So we're going to go back out of there, and if you hold down the menu, that brings you to the longer list of functions that you will need to modify depending on what you're doing with your radio. And this is where the 200, I don't know that is superior. In fact, it might not be quite as good as the 300. It throws you right into a list that's 124 items long. And you can see where you are at the very top there. You can see that it says APRS right now. The 300, by comparison, brings you to a higher level category than which you would drill through to modify the options that are there. So that might be a little bit more of a personal preference. On the one hand, this list means fewer pushes of the button, but you are going to have to rotate through a good ways to get to the very end of the list should you want to access the SD card, the micro SD card function or format, or one of the ones that's right down near the bottom here. So I think there's a lot of other things that we could dive into when we try to compare these radios, but thinking about them in terms of when they were released as a point of comparison, thinking about them in terms of their functionality, some of those major differences, and then also looking at how they actually work. Those are everyday operations that, may help you make a decision one way or the other on how you want to proceed. And of course, all this is going to be complicated by the, as of this recording, unreleased 500 and exactly what that might look like and how that might change our decision equation. But I expect that will be more expensive, so this comparison will still be useful for some time in the future. For those of us who are not trying to have the high end, but are trying to exist somewhere in the middle, or maybe even the lower middle. And that does bring me to the very final point that pushed me in this direction. I wanted to buy this radio, and I also needed to get wire to go out to an antenna. I wanted to get a mobile whip for my car, and a whole bunch of other things. So there was an aspect of price consciousness that I wanted to consider when I did all this stuff. And It's all a great journey. Who knows where I'll go in the future? This is where I've started, and I hope that you enjoyed this little look at the radios and how they are different. And I hope you will come back and join me again in the future. Talk to you later.